Coming to you from the table my dog has been hiding under because of all the damn fireworks outside, I'm RJ Balde, and this is the Trichomes Hash It Out podcast. On this show, we feature conversations about trending cannabis topics. We also bring in industry insiders and influencers to discuss their point of view. In this episode, I'll be talking to Terry Blevins about how security operations have changed for businesses during the coronavirus pandemic and the unrest in the country sparked by systemic racial injustice. We'll also talk about his work to implement reform within law enforcement, establish racial equity, and much more. Without further ado, let's hash it out. Today, I am joined by Terry Blevins, CEO of Armaplex, a California-based security and risk company that specializes in cannabis security. Terry is also a former police officer, a policing reform expert, and executive board member at the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, or LEAP. Welcome to the show, Terry.
Thank you for having me, RJ. Appreciate it.
Where are you joining us virtually from?
Los Angeles, California.
Los Angeles. Okay. And how's your year been? I know that's a loaded question.
Well, being in the security industry, especially in California, for the first half of this year has presented a unique set of challenges. I was a homicide detective. I lived and worked in war zones, and I've seen a lot of stuff in my life, and I can tell you that this is certainly going to go on that list of either probably top 5. I tell you, it's been really interesting to have experienced this, but hopefully it just makes you better.
Yeah, one can only hope. It's so strange because there's nothing in our lifetime that we can really draw a comparison to when it comes to like the combination of events that have been happening simultaneously this year, particularly in this country.
That's the interesting thing, is that it seems like everything happened at once, and I do believe that there's a cause and effect. I believe that, probably one of the reasons that we had so much rioting and looting was probably because of the fact that people weren't working, and they were feeling desperate and disconnected, and everybody's nerves have just been on edge. And I don't want to diminish by any means the demonstrations that were happening, because all of those were very justified, and I can tell you more about that later, but sure. Honestly, that I've been expecting to come for a long time, but I just feel like that it's that there's been sort of a series of causes and effects, and one thing affects the other, and so let's hope that when we start to fix one or all of them, let's just hope that that can help us, the whole country move forward in a better way.
Yeah, one can only hope. I will take any beam of sunlight right now, any inch of good news. I will definitely take that. For sure. Now, speaking of your work in the security sector, the security industry, you have experience in security in multiple facets, from working with the U.S. Department of State to working with Yamana Gold, a mining conglomerate, to working as the head of security for Beats by Dre, and now the CEO of Armaplex, which specializes in cannabis security services, like I said earlier. So what led you to eventually working in the cannabis industry? And since you've began, how have you seen the security needs of those in the industry differ from those in other industries in which you have worked?
Sure. Well, the last few years that I was in law enforcement, I really started to see that we had an unhealthy relationship with, with the war on drugs, and with, our feeling, about marijuana is what we called it at the time, at least in law enforcement. And, and I things happen in my life. I have a grandchild who was cured of childhood epilepsy with cannabis, and then I had friends that I was in Iraq and Afghanistan with that used cannabis to help them recover from from PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started to realize that that my government had lied to me. First of all, that cannabis is not it does have medicinal value, and of course, for it to be a Schedule One drug, a narcotic, the stipulation is that it has no medicinal value. So,
Mm-hmm.
I that's what started me on my journey. I'm like, okay, I realize now that they've lied to me, and I always felt that it was a little bit of an overreaction, to be honest with you. But I did feel that it should still be illegal.
Sure.
And then after this transformation that happened to me, I was working at Beats by Dre, and when California voted to legalize for adult consumption, and I had a friend who was working in security who had dabbled in cannabis security. He told me that there was going to be an opportunity, and he said he felt like there was going to be an opportunity for professional companies because there had been a lot of fly-by-night companies that were working in that industry, and almost because of the fact that they were working with businesses that were illicit in the traditional market that weren't really licensed themselves, and it's just another reason to legalize. These businesses cannabis businesses were forced to work with security companies that weren't licensed as well, just by the nature of the fact that they weren't really on the legal side of things themselves. So I saw an opportunity. I felt like it meshed well. Became a member of LEAP, and they had started to educate me about all of these things. I just really dove in and really wanted to understand the nuances. And I started to realize that there might be an opportunity for me not only to work in the cannabis industry, but also to use it as a platform to not only to learn and understand myself, but maybe to get other police officers to start looking and asking the question. And so that was when I just started the company. I started doing security plans for cannabis businesses and learning more about cannabis security and what was going on. And it was really, the field was in its infancy. There weren't a lot of people in it that were really experts at it. There were a couple of people that I worked with that really, gave me the information that they had and the things that they had done. And so we basically just kind of stood this cannabis security industry up from infancy, and especially on the legal side. And that's when we got our license to provide security guards, and we started providing security guards to cannabis businesses. And that was in 2017. And here we are a few years later, and we're a medium-sized company. We have cannabis clients. 90+% of all of our clients are cannabis, and that's really what we specialize in. So.
Wow. And you also work with non-cannabis clients too.
That's correct. Yes, we
Gotcha.
do. Unfortunately, though, sometimes some of those businesses shy away from us just because
you work with cannabis businesses.
Yes, I've been specifically told that before by I bid on contracts. And they told me, they said, unfortunately, we just don't think that our investors would, if they knew that you really specialize in cannabis, we just, so it's unfortunate, but it's getting better, but there's still a stigma attached to it.
Are those businesses that have been denying your services, are they also California businesses?
Yes, they were.
So this is in a legal state too, even.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. But keep in mind that, there's still no banking solution for the cannabis industry. And, these people they know that it's illegal at the federal level. And I'm sure it was an overreaction, but that was I guess they're being cautious. And, we thought about forming a different DBA, so that we could work with those businesses, but decided, I think I'll stay the course, and we'll just see how this pans out, because I really was hoping that people start to have a healthier attitude about cannabis and
Yeah.
about cannabis businesses and about the industry as a whole, and just start to accept us for what we are, instead of hiding things, or trying to to use a DBA or whatever. It's like, you know what, this is what it is. Accept it. We're This industry is here to
Right.
stay, and
It's not going anywhere. Yeah, right.
exactly. So
Right.
everybody just needs to get on board, So
Exactly. And I hear many stories about people who were in similar boats as you, where it wasn't until they saw the benefits firsthand, maybe in a loved one or even within their own firsthand experience. It's not until they see those benefits from cannabis in people around them that they really start to realize, because now you're generating your own information and observations instead of taking what the government is telling you or what these news sources are telling you. Do you have any personal experience with cannabis, or did you just solely see it through your loved ones and those that were benefiting from it?
Well, that's how I started out.
Okay.
And then, I was injured in Iraq, and when I came back, I got I don't remember, it was a narcotic pill that the doctors gave me at the time to relieve my pain. I have a pretty severe neck injury because of it, and I was recuperating, and I was taking the medication, and I didn't like the way it made me feel. There were side effects, and I talked to my doctor, and he said, "Well, he said, if you don't like it, you get off of it, but you're just going to have to deal with the pain." I did. I wasn't able to. I was sick for about 2 weeks. I had, probably not as bad a DTs as some people have with other drugs, but I suffered from it. I thought I felt like I was going to die. I was miserable for 2 weeks, and I said, never again. I'm never going to do that again. And I'll just put up with the pain if I have to. And so then after a few years, of other things and educating myself and understanding more about the plant and the medicinal benefits, I had a friend that I mentioned, friends that had PTSD. One friend in particular, he says he's on the planet today because of cannabis. He had horrible side effects from a cocktail of drugs that he was taking. He was lucky enough to talk to a doctor who and he was a police officer himself. We were there together training police officers in Afghanistan, and he came back with horrible PTSD. He was suicidal, and I saw his transformation, and he was able to get off all of his medications.
Wow.
And he used one strain during the day to relieve his anxiety, and another one to sleep at night. And I could see firsthand the impact of this on his life. I mean, thank goodness now, very successful. He's a security manager. He's, has a very good life. He's,
wow.
Taking good care of his kids and stuff. And none of that would have been possible if it hadn't been for cannabis. He swears that he doesn't think he would be on the planet today if it wasn't for cannabis. So
Wow.
I saw that, and so I used it. I started to use it for my pain, and it's it's difficult. I can't use it during the day when I'm driving or anything like that, but I do use it when I know that I'm not going to be driving for a long time. I know that that it's okay for me to to partake, and it does. It really helps me with my pain, and of course, for me to personally see the benefit of it, it just really helps me to be an advocate for it as well. So that's part of my overall transformation, and I call it my redemption, RJ. I actually at times get a little bit emotional about it, because there's a little bit of guilt attached to the fact that that I had to see it this way, and I had to get out of law enforcement for me to be able to have perspective on it, and to really understand that I was wrong about it, and that a lot of us were wrong about it. but it's been a journey for me, and I just look at it this way. I guess at least I'm not still stuck in that rut. I regret the fact
Yeah.
that I didn't figure it out sooner and that I wasn't more open minded. But again, not to make excuses, it's tough when you're surrounded by, you know, conservative people who are in law enforcement, and that's the message, that's the take on everything. It's hard to gain to step back and gain perspective. So I feel like I actually had to leave. So I mean, I still have a lot of friends in law enforcement. I'm actively involved with, because of LEAP and everything,
Hmm.
but I just didn't have the perspective that I had until I actually was able to leave and really
Mm.
educate myself about it more. So
Well, yeah, it's better late than never, right? And I'm
I
glad
guess
that you have found that relief and those alternatives that provide you that relief, but don't impede upon your quality of life as well. And I'm glad to hear that those around you have been finding relief too. Now, you said you started Armaplex in 2017. Was that right?
yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
So, the cannabis industry continues to evolve and adapt to sudden and drastic change. That's certainly no different in 2020. With the peaceful protests for racial justice have also come situations of looting, uprisings, destruction of businesses, um, you know, more destructive acts like that. Or how have you seen the terms of operations and the needs of your clients change during this time in particular?
So, if you don't mind, I'll just give you a little bit of a background on sort of,
Please.
the last few years that I was in law enforcement. I was tasked with doing internal affairs investigations on other officers,
Okay.
and I didn't really want that position, but I felt like that it was important to be fair, and that somebody who really cared about both sides of the issue to really do it. So I agreed. I dove into it. I really started investigating in the science of internal affairs investigations. I looked at federal oversight. The When I started doing that, the DOJ had just published a paper about police accountability and conducting internal affairs investigations. I was able to go to
Hmm.
training, some national training on internal affairs investigations, and I did a lot of research online. I found that there was the most police agencies in the United States did not even at the time have a formal complaint process, which was
Mm-hmm.
unbelievable to me. I tried at
Hmm.
my department. I really tried to formalize the process so that it would be a lot easier for citizens to file complaints. I got pushback from my
Wow.
department saying that we don't if we start doing that, we're just going to open it up and we're going to get a ton of frivolous complaints, and these honorable officers will have these complaints on their record, and
Hmm.
I found that was the sort of the feeling nationwide about it. And I studied riots, and there had been some a federal congressional committee work on riots back in the 60s and the cause of that. And so I
Mm-hmm.
understood, why there was civil unrest. I started to understand that that there might be, communities that felt disconnected and felt that like they weren't being heard. And I thought, well, how can they really be heard, especially by law enforcement, if there is no, real widely established mechanism for them to file complaints. And I
Mm-hmm.
actually, RJ, during those years, especially 2008 and 2009, anybody that would listen to me, I said, we have a major problem here. We are likely to have more riots in the future, and it might even get to the point where that we have a revolution if we don't figure out how to reconnect these communities that feel marginalized and disconnected.
Mm.
And man, nobody in law enforcement wanted to listen to me. As a matter of fact, I made a few enemies, and ultimately it was
Wow.
why I ended up leaving, because I just felt like that I wasn't, that nobody would listen to anything. They were doing things that I didn't agree with. They were harassing
Wow.
immigrants, and they were focusing on marijuana. My agency at the time was getting more money in federal drug grants than they were from the actual taxpayers. And if you don't think that a law enforcement agency, their priorities are and their culture is upside down, when that's the case, it was
Yeah.
happening nationwide, especially with agencies of that size that didn't have a lot of money like larger agencies. So
Sure.
I knew that something was going to happen, and then of course Ferguson happened, and then other
Uh-huh.
demonstrations and riots happened, and because of the same
Uh-huh.
reasons. And so I just had a feeling that this was going to happen again until we had some real serious reform. So when this happened, I really wasn't that surprised. What did surprise me was the
Mm-hmm.
impact on the cannabis industry. I felt like that I knew that there hadn't, I've been tracking the whole, equity effort, tried to be part
Sure.
of that. I've offered free services, free security plans, and that sort of thing to equity businesses, just to try to help out. I've actually lobbied with certain city council members and other government officials on trying to develop their equity programs, because I really felt like that that a lot of the freedom that we have today and the legalization was
Mm-hmm.
built on the backs of people that were in the illicit industry, and a lot of those people were people of color, and so
Sure.
they shouldn't be excluded from this marketplace, from this industry, from these opportunities. And so
Mm.
I just saw that there was a disconnect there, and but yet I felt like there was a connection with young people and with the community, with this
Mm-hmm.
industry, and it just really surprised me to see the businesses that were, just ravaged during the looting. And I
Mm-hmm.
was I'm on a panel uh, of industry people that are working with the Oakland Police Department. We were on a call
Sure. Yeah.
yesterday, and they received the worst of it. And so there is some progress, and there's some collaboration to try to to figure out what we can do to fix this. But it was horrible. Yeah, and I have uh, I had the when this was going on, I was on the ground working with my people, and I was getting calls from some of my guards saying, "Boss, I'm looking down the street and they're coming this way, and I don't know what to do." And I
Wow.
tell you, it's not a good feeling when you know that you have put people out there and their lives are at risk. It's you do what you
Yeah.
can, but but fortunately, none of the businesses that we were guarding were heavily affected. Most of them, our guards were able to actually fend off the attacks. So we were very fortunate, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not the businesses, especially in Northern California and Oakland, were not that fortunate. They were hit really hard, and it was just
Mm.
devastating to the industry. And what's RJ, it's amazing to me that the industry has suffered so much. The legal industry has suffered so much, recently
Mm-hmm.
with the illicit market and with heavy taxation and heavy regulation, and then with the vape crisis, and now
Oh,
this. It's yeah. I guess we had a little bit of a win when cannabis was designated as a as an essential.
essential.
Yes, and we were super happy
Yeah.
about that. And I have
Sure.
really good friends who are in the industry who called me and said, "Hey, yes, we were
Hmm.
designated an essential business." So that was a
Mm-hmm.
little win there, but it just seems like
You got to take what
yeah,
you can get.
exactly. That's true. Look at the positive side.
Right. Exactly. Now, speaking of the work that you are doing with the Oakland PD, if I understand this correctly, there's no educational standard for law enforcement when it comes to uh, being abreast in the legal industry. Is that right? There's no standard for that.
That is correct. And it's something that we've been working on. I've worked on it with LEAP, and I've worked on it with a
Uh-huh.
couple of other organizations. In Dale Sky Jones at Oaksterdam. I know that she had tried, and a couple of other, cannabis educational companies have produced some things. I've, worked on some of that, but law
Hmm.
enforcement just hasn't been open to it. And it's, the interesting thing about law enforcement is right now it's controlled by older guys like me who were,
Mm.
old fashioned and sort of stuck in their ways, and they hate marijuana, and they very begrudgingly, agree to, allow cannabis businesses to function in their jurisdiction. And the younger ones seem a lot more progressive, but they're not the ones that are in control right now. And
Mm.
it's a top down type of organization, or structure model, because there are a lot of different police agencies, and that's the problem too. If even if you were to be able to get some sort of national or federal acceptance, which by the way isn't
Mm-hmm.
going to happen until it's legal at the federal level, you still
Mm-hmm.
have, and most people are surprised by this, RJ. There are over 18,000 separate law enforcement agencies in the United States, and they all operate independently. They all operate with almost no oversight. There is no
Wow.
national standard for anything. The DOJ
Huh.
creates these standards, but it's up to each individual agency as to whether or not they want to follow it or not. So it's,
Yikes.
yeah, it's, and we've really pushed this because we want. There have been police departments that ended up with egg on their face. They seized large amounts of what they thought was marijuana. They publish it, on social media. Hey, we seized, 80, 100 pounds, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
NYPD had a horrible situation where they seized this, and it was all hemp.
Oh,
It
jeez.
Yeah, and they had to retract everything. It was just horribly embarrassing for them, and rightfully so, because if you're not willing to get educated about it, then you deserve to be embarrassed.
Yeah. That was back. Was that back in December
I
of
think
last
so.
of
Yeah, it was just a few months
2019?
ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So, would you be in support of a national standard?
Oh,
I know
absolutely.
that would be so difficult to implement, though, right? Because you say there are 18,000 independently run agencies out there.
But at least we could create the standard. It would be it would be a training program,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
we could at least offer it, in
Sure.
the agencies that, so that it would be easier for them to access. Some departments are struggling with finances, and now that we're talking about defunding the police,
Mm-hmm,
usually training is the first thing to go when police departments get their budgets cut.
mm-hmm.
Training is on that list of one of the top first things to go. So unfortunately, it's going to make it even more difficult for us to get training for police officers on
Mm.
cannabis. So
So, when you hear the phrase defunding the police, how does that make you feel personally? And also, that is an interesting point that you say when budgets are cut for the police department, it's usually training first. Why is that?
well, because it's not something that is needed to actually get out there and answer calls. So
Okay.
police departments, and sheriff's offices, they generally they classify as their sort of number one priority
Uh-huh.
responding to emergency incidents, especially incidents involving violence, and that's they call it a priority one call.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we get a call, for a situation like that we want to go respond. We want to go help people. We want to go out there and see if we can save a life, or we can prevent somebody from, you know, uh, being seriously injured. So
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of the priority, and then everything else falls below that, and it's on a based on, like any other organization. You
Mm-hmm.
have sort of tiers of uh, things that demand your resources. And when you have limited budgets, you have to categorize those things, and at the top of that list is just preserving health and safety. And I know that a lot of people feel badly towards the police right now, and I understand that. And trust me, I'm not an apologist for law enforcement, because I know that there needs to be a lot of reform. But I can tell you that
Sure.
there are a lot of really good, decent men and women in law enforcement that really care and do
Hmm.
want to preserve the health and safety of the public. And so they, that's sort of at the top of the list, is just going out there and answering calls and trying to, to prevent, people from dying or being injured. So
Hmm.
unfortunately, training falls down on the list of that. And as far as you were asking about defunding the police, you
Sure.
know, it's an interesting phrase. And I don't think it means what people initially perceive it to be. They
Hmm.
perceive it to be, just totally, getting rid of police,
Abolishing. Yeah.
abolishing the police.
Sure.
And now some departments may need that because they're so corrupt,
Hmm.
um, like Minneapolis has done. I think that's a good idea. I think they need to start from scratch. There was a
Hmm.
great example in New Jersey. Camden Police Department just completely abolished the police department and started from scratch. And they've had amazing, anybody that listening, if you get a chance, look up that agency and the stories on that. It's really incredible, the transformation that agency agency had, and the way that they were able to. It was just a sickness. I mean, it was a sick
Sure.
agency, sick from the inside out. And there were a few officers that were doing good work, but they just needed to completely abolish it and start from scratch, and they did that. They had success. But other agencies in general, defunding really, and this is, it's interesting because Leap and I have been talking about this for years,
Mm.
about the fact that, police officers shouldn't be asked to solve all of society's problems.
Yeah,
You ask
absolutely.
any police, even police officers who hate the idea of defunding, or might not like the idea of reform, you ask, they're still going to tell you, yes, society asks us to solve all of their problems. It's like
Mm.
anything happens, call the police.
Mm.
And we go out, and, sometimes we're ill equipped to deal with certain
Hmm.
types of situations. And so one of the things that Leap and I have been advocating for a while now is, the implementation of other services that, that can be available when there's a crisis situation, like a mental illness situation or a domestic violence.
Mm.
Sometimes the police do need to be there. Los Angeles city council just voted that they will have other people respond to nonviolent calls for service, people that are better equipped to deal with that type of situation. And that's
Sure.
really what we've been advocating for a while now. And I believe that that's what it means. It just means really a reallocation of some of the
Right.
funds. Law
Right.
enforcement still needs the money. They still need to be able to respond, but
Hmm. Of course.
it does. The money just does need to. We need to rethink really how we're spending our money on law enforcement, and I think that's really what
Yeah.
it's all about.
I often think back to a clip I remember seeing that came out in 2016, and it was of David Brown, the Dallas police chief.
Yes,
And he said something very along the lines of what you just said, where
I love that
he
clip.
felt, yeah, okay, so you know what I'm
I know
talking about. Yeah,
exactly the clip you're talking
yeah.
about. I
He
sat
said
there.
he,
Yes, I
yeah,
was
go ahead.
beaming from ear to ear when he was saying. I'm like,
Yeah.
yes,
He was like, we're asking the police to do too much. You know what I mean? And
yep.
like, he even said, like, we have a loose dog problem here in Dallas, so let's have the police chase dogs around town,
Yeah. Well, RJ, it's interesting because a lot of people in the U.S., that was the first time that they heard that. There were those of us that have been involved in this for a while that felt the same way. But a lot of people commented to me after that and said, I hadn't really thought about it that way, And
Right.
I'm just glad that there are people that he had the guts to speak out like that and say, hey, we shouldn't be asked to solve all the problems. And not that woe is us, feel bad for us, but it's, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, there
Right.
are problems that are better solved by other solutions.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, that's what I get when people when I hear people advocating for defunding the police. I think that that phrase just in and of itself for people who may not look past it is very triggering. Just the idea of defunding the police. If you don't look further into that, that can be a very harrowing phrase.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's not about completely ridding the country of law enforcement. It's about more evenly allocating those funds and perhaps not putting so much responsibility on the police when those certain responsibilities could be better handled by different people that are more adept in that specific type of situation.
That's exactly
Right?
true. And I'll tell you, you really just paraphrased it well because that's exactly what it is. I would just caution people to be really careful because
Mm,
we need to have some sanity in that discussion too. Let's not go too far. The
sure.
police do, most of them do good work and they do keep us safe. And crime has been decreasing in the United States for the last few decades.
Hmm.
There are a lot of men and women that really care and do a good job. So let's try to do it in the same way. I just found out yesterday that the Oakland City Council has voted to take all of the equipment away from Oakland Police Department because they want to demilitarize the police department. And I understand that. I agree with some of those measures, but they're also taking away all of their helmets, all of their shields, all of their riot shields,
Hmm.
everything. And Oakland has a lot of demonstrations. So now those police officers have to go out there and deal with rioting and looting without it doesn't take effect for a few months. So we're going to try to lobby to at least get some sanity, in
Right.
that decision and say, I understand it if you don't want them to dress up in military garb and you don't want them to to overreact, you
Sure.
know, but or to look like they're an occupying force. I don't want that either. But there has
Hmm.
to be, they have to be able to protect themselves. They have to deal with riots. So to me, that's where it has gone too far, and I worry that other agencies are going to do that. And it just concerns me. I just like people to try, to talk to your politicians and let them know, yeah, I want to reallocate resources, but I don't want to do things that don't make any sense.
Sure. I also understand that there are certain areas of California that have stopped approving cannabis licenses due to the riots and the looting, citing, an increased risk. Is that true? And if so, how do you feel about that?
Well, yes, my understanding is that I was actually contacted by a city council member who was saying that that they were there were some people that were asking that question, some people in the
Uh-huh.
community that were saying, should we put a hold on this? And then I've spoken to a couple of other people who said other jurisdictions around California are asking the same question, and it's really unfortunate because the reality is, RJ, that there was violence that was attached to the illicit market,
Mm-hmm.
and what we've seen is we have seen a decrease in violence because of the legal market, and we felt like we were making progress because of that. And just because it's a legal cannabis business doesn't mean that it it's going to be attacked, and the illicit one is not going to be attacked.
Right.
During rioting and looting. So they're not
Sure.
really solving any problems. They're just creating more problems because the legal businesses have to have security standards, and we
Mm-hmm.
can implement, especially now that we know what happened and how it happened. We can
Mm-hmm.
implement, and these are age old practices, mitigation measures that we've used in security for decades, and we can implement those in the legal cannabis businesses and help them to really minimize the risk to the looting, and and reduce the likelihood that these groups that see the opportunity because they hit a business last time, if they realize, if they
Mm-hmm.
got a lot, now the next time there's looting, they're going to go back. So if we minimize that, then we have an opportunity to kind of prevent it from happening. But the
Mm.
illicit businesses don't have those standards. The illicit
Right.
businesses, they're just gonna spend the bare minimum on security just to get by because they don't know how
Hmm.
long they're going to be in that location. A lot of
Hmm.
times they don't even have vaults or safes. They're so much more vulnerable,
Hmm.
and they create a hazard. So if there's any cities that are considering this, or anybody knows a city that's considering this, I am more than happy to speak to that city council, and talk to them and help them really understand what the issues are at hand. I do this all the time. I've spoken to dozens of city councils in the past, even before
Sure.
the looting, about security, about the public safety implications of allowing cannabis businesses in their community. And
Hmm.
I can't even tell you how many times, RJ, I've had people come up to me afterwards and say, I appreciate you speaking, because now I truly understand. I understand that my community isn't going to go to hell in a handbasket if we let a couple of dispensaries come in. So
Right.
it just about discussing, informing themselves properly, and really allowing the experts to let them know. I'm not biased in favor of the industry. I have protected communities my whole life, and I'm
Hmm.
not about to start advocating for something that I feel is going to place communities in danger. I would never be involved in an industry or an effort or anything that endangered communities. My whole goal has always been to make it safer for
Hmm.
people and safer for communities.
Yeah. And you have, well, so you were a local police officer for 16 years, is that right? And then you were in federal law enforcement for 4?
Yes, I started
Okay.
with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office when I was 21 years old, which I'm
Wow.
57 now. So yeah, it's a
Okay.
long time ago. Yeah.
Gotcha. Now, so you are doing a lot of work now, um, like you've mentioned, to bridge that gap between law enforcement and cannabis. We mentioned LEAP earlier, which is the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. You're an executive board member of that organization. And last month, LEAP released a memo with recommendations for national police reform, which included focuses on transparency, accountability, better practices, and alternatives. Can you just tell me a little bit about what that letter suggests?
Sure. So we called this letter "Recommendations to Transform Policing," and
Mm-hmm.
these were these were things that we had been talking about for a while,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think we had just really sort of summarized it in one particular um, document, and we felt like it was the right time to do it, and we
Sure.
we feel like we're in a good position to do that because, RJ, LEAP is really the only organization of its kind nationwide. It's a national organization,
Mm-hmm.
and there really is no other national organization made up primarily of people, former and current people who are working in law enforcement, who now are saying, let's revisit this. Let's try to have some, a discussion about what the problems are, and see what possible solutions are. So we felt like that we were in a good position of leadership to be able to speak, and our membership has just skyrocketed in the last few weeks since this happened.
Wow.
I was talking to another board member the other day who was actively involved with the people that handle the membership requests, and they said they're
Mm-hmm.
backlogged now for weeks because law enforcement,
Hmm.
police officers, and prosecutors all across the country have seen this letter and are signing on and saying, we need. And it was very encouraging to me because you can imagine my in the past, I've been a little discouraged when I was in law enforcement. I was discouraged
Sure.
that there weren't enough police officers that were understanding these issues. And so this letter, basically in the letter, what we uh, wanted to say was that we stand in opposition to violence, that police violence and
Mm-hmm.
brutality, and that we stand against misconduct, and we're in favor of reform and in favor of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things that we ask for, we want there to be a national database, that records officers who have had issues, officers who have been terminated or resigned due to misconduct, so that other police agencies, when they're hiring, because if a police officer, and most people don't realize this, if a police officer gets fired from one agency for some sort of misconduct, they can almost always find another agency that will hire them.
Wow.
Yeah, most people have no idea that this happens. There are very few people that get out of law enforcement and are just done permanently. There's almost always an agency, and the reason that is true is because, first of all, each agency is independent. Like I said before, they don't necessarily have the same standards, and a lot of smaller agencies can't afford to send their people to full-time academies. So if they have someone that already has certification and training and shows up at their door and has a shady, situation in their past, they're going to hire that person because they need people out on the street,
Wow.
So it more often than not, they don't get out. If they were fired from one agency, they just move to another agency that has less strict standards. And so we're hoping to try to be able to have an impact on that. We believe that there should be a national standard for accountability regarding human rights and investigations into police abuse. We feel like that overall there should be more transparency, more accountability. There should be alternatives, like I was saying before, alternatives to sending a cop to every single situation that comes up in the community. And there are some other issues. I personally feel like there needs to be we need to take a new look at police unions. I feel that some police unions they just go too far in trying to just protect the officers regardless of what the officer does. And it's sort of, that's what a union's job is to do, is to protect. If you have a union member that has been paying dues and they get fired or disciplined, it's your job to step in and defend them. And unfortunately, in police work, I'm not sure that that's a model that works that well. So we need to rethink police unions and the jurisdiction, their relationship with police unions. And sometimes, we were talking about abolishing certain police departments before. Sometimes you have to abolish a police department because they have a binding contract with a union, and police officers need protections, but it shouldn't go too far, So that's one of the things that I advocate for. I advocate really there needs to be a national standard for police accountability, and we just don't have that right now. So
now, in that letter, there's a quote. Let me pull it up real quick. So the quote from that letter is, it says, quote, "American policing still carries a legacy of systemic racism from the Jim Crow era to today." And then it goes on to say that today words aren't enough. We support national action because we owe equal rights to every person regardless of their background. So what would you like to see be done to fully dismantle the racism that is embedded in our systems and establish not only racial equality, but racial equity?
So, I do believe that there should be a push to have more people of color in law enforcement. There should also be efforts to include more, every gender be, equally represented in law enforcement. I read an article the other day. There was a study that was conducted that said that we feel like that law enforcement wouldn't be having nearly as many problems if there were more women that worked in law enforcement. And I can tell you some of the best cops that I ever worked with were females. And, some of honestly, one of the best detectives I ever had working for me was a female. I mean, caring, and I mean, it's like anything else. There's, good and bad, but I can tell you that they bring, honestly, they bring a little bit of sanity at times to situations.
Sure,
When you
sure.
have some male officers who, like to escalate situations. Sometimes a
Hmm.
female can step in and speak to the person that's in distress, a member of the public, and maybe bring
Hmm.
some sanity into that. So I believe that there should be more females in law enforcement. I believe that that's not the only solution. Some people say, yeah, well, we have a lot of people of color or diversity in law enforcement,
Hmm.
and that still hasn't solved the problem. And I agree with that. So I believe that we need to. There are studies that have been done and are being done about our systems. We need to
Mm.
get rid of the pat and frisk. There are certain things that we do in law
Mhm.
enforcement that lead us towards profiling, and we
Mhm.
need to revamp those activities. Some of them need to be abolished completely and not even used. Um, the whole system just needs to be reevaluated from the top, from the top down, and so that we understand, because there are a lot of people, a lot of police officers that are not inherently racist, but they
Mhm.
have biases that they aren't even aware of. And so we need
Sure.
to educate them and show them, look, you don't think that you're doing anything racist, but these activities are inherently racist. We
Mm.
want to help you understand why, because most of them are opposed to that. They're like, well, I'm not racist,
Yep.
and so they just have trouble understanding that they're
Yeah.
involved in a system that is inherently racist, that in a lot of ways was created, after the Civil War was created.
Mhm.
Our criminal justice system was basically created to try to control people that were formerly slaves, because white
Mhm.
people had fear of them,
Yep.
and so we can't continue with that same system that has all of these inherent biases and expect people to feel protected, and like they have a voice in a system that has been
Sure.
stacked against them for so long.
Yeah. It really does come down to that the education to really fully make sure that these people understand how and why this system was established. And once you know that, it's easier to understand how those biases have come into the system.
I'm a perfect example of that, RJ. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
Sure.
you. I'm a
Please. No,
perfect
please,
example of
please.
that, because
Mm-hmm.
I used to think these ideas were ridiculous. I
Mm-hmm.
was I was conservative. I was surrounded by other people that thought the way that I thought,
Mm-hmm.
and and I thought that these, when people talked about white privilege and this sort of thing, and that our criminal justice system was stacked against people of color, I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was ridiculous. But then I was fortunate enough, once I left law enforcement, to be educated by people who were smarter than I was, who obviously had
Hmm.
figured it out quicker and better than I did. And I started reading. I mean, I started reading everything I could read. I read
Mm-hmm.
books. There's a book called White Rage. There's just a series of a lot of books on this issue,
Mm-hmm.
very objective. Some of them written by scientists, people who have really done investigations into these things and
Mm-hmm.
really understand. And you can't deny the evidence once you start educating you. And that's what when I talk to other police officers, I ask them, so have you made an effort to actually educate yourself? Have you read these books and done
Hmm.
this research to
Mm-hmm.
really understand implicit bias and what that means? And most
Right.
of them say no, they haven't. And I say, well, please educate. If you come out the other side feeling the same way you do now, that's fine. But I can tell you they won't, because the
Right.
people that I know that have educated themselves are just come out the other side saying, wow, I never
Mm.
knew that the system was actually stacked against people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're just hoping that we might have the opportunity to start, educating these police officers and getting them to look at these issues. And they don't have bad intent.
Sure.
They're just not aware. Now, some of them do have bad intentions, but most of them really don't. They just don't understand these things. And you basically said it perfectly. It really is all about, training and educating these people.
Well, I thank you for the work that you're doing to continue to spread that education and to really work from the inside to implement this systemic change that you're advocating for. For someone with your perspective, your unique perspective, for someone who has been in law enforcement and is now out of it and has that unique perspective from both inside and outside.
Well, thank you, RJ. I appreciate that.
Of course. Yeah, of course. And I thank you for the work that you're doing through Armaplex, through LEAP, through all of that. And I thank you for taking an hour of your day to sit down and to tell me about the work that you're doing. I really, really appreciate it. Before we go here, where can our listeners find the work that you're doing through LEAP and the work that you're doing through Armaplex and what's going on with you?
Sure. Well, they can find my company's website is armaplex.com. Super easy to find. They can Google Terry Blevins, LEAP, L-E-A-P, Terry Blevins, Cannabis Security. They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm actually super easy to get a hold of. I'm very responsive. People contact me on LinkedIn all the time, and I try to respond to everybody. LEAP, www.leap.cc is the easiest way to get to us. There are a couple of other redirects, Law Enforcement Action Partnership. Go to that site. I really would encourage people to go to that website because, like I said, we're the only national organization of its kind, and support it. If they can support it financially, we would love that because we operate strictly off of donations, and most of us actually are volunteers. I don't get paid to do this work, so and I'm happy to do it, but we do have costs associated with that. So any support that people can give the organization, and shout outs, if you can share that that organization on your social media, we would love that and appreciate any sort of helping to share the work that's being done.
You got it. Well, Terry, thank you again so much for joining me today, man. I really appreciate it. I hope you continue to stay safe and you continue to thrive through the cloud that is surrounding us in 2020. And hopefully I'll be able to see you in person soon. We can have another conversation.
Yeah.
Face to face this time. Yeah.
Exactly. That would be great. Well, thank you, RJ. I really appreciate your interest in all of these issues and the work that you and your organization are doing. I know that you guys do a lot of really important work, and so I appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to talk about these things and hopefully maybe just educate people a little bit more on these topics. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Terry.
You too, RJ. Take care.
My thanks again to Terry Blevins for joining me. If you are a member of the cannabis community and have a story you want to share with us, we would love to hear from you. You can reach the show at hashitout@trichomes.com. You can help others find the show by taking a moment to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at trichomes.com and following us on all social media. Hash It Out is produced by David Fortin and presented by trichomes.com. I'm RJ Balde. Thanks for listening.